The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
Welcome to Titans of Nuclear. Today I'm here with Myrto Tripathi, who is the president and founder of Voices of Nuclear. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure and a great honor because Titans of Nuclear, I've been there for a long time, and it's a little bit humbling to be invited to a podcast that's called Titans of Nuclear. I'm not sure I feel like a titan quite yet, but hopefully one day.
Well, we certainly think you are, and it's a pleasure to have you on. Let's go ahead and just get started by talking about your background and how you ended up in nuclear.
That's a good question, and generally a rather long story, but I'll try to make it short. When I left school, I very much wanted to change the world and every single piece and bits of it, but couldn't decide if I had to start with the pandas, the hunger, the wars, the sanitations, the gender equality or whatnot. There was way too many issues, so little time. And I early on decided that energy was probably the root cause and the root enabler, the greatest enabler for all of those causes at the same time. And if I could manage to bring energy to people, then not only would they be enabled to achieve all those things, but also they would be able to make their own choices without me having to direct what they were doing or not doing. Hence my first orientation towards energy. Naturally, I found my way to nuclear energy because I'm French, and the nuclear energy sector was something pretty important and exciting still at the time, even, and I'm talking a very early 2000s here, even if the atmosphere, the public opinion around it was not so good still then. I worked for 10 years for Areva, on the front end of the fuel cycle, mining, chemistry, enrichment, then fuel manufacturing and design. I was a market strategy director for worldwide Areva, which is now Framatome. And then I ended my career in 2014 as in charge of conducting the negotiating teams for selling the nuclear third generation nuclear power plant, the EPR. And so I was a salesperson, so to speak, pretty strategic one, but still a salesperson, until I realized that as an engineer and as a business developer, my role was not so important and not so useful because everything depended on public acceptance. The political decision, the financing, the start-off of the projects, everything. And if you didn't have public acceptance, then you didn't have projects. And you could be as smart and dedicated and engaged as you wanted. Those power plants would never see the light. And you would never bring energy to people while ensuring their environment was preserved and the climate was stabilized. So that's when I left Areva, just prior to the Paris Agreement and the COP21, and joined the UN Global Compact to mobilize industry, business around the climate negotiations to try to make sure that the solution providers would be part of the conversation. I worked for the climate negotiations for 3 to 4 years. Then was very, very disappointed by what I found there. I apologize and I'm sorry to say that. Because I essentially met a lot of people that were really enthusiastic and were doing a great work, but were little interested, or little did they realize that the technologies they were advocating didn't always work, or not quite yet. And they had a pretty dogmatic approach to all these things, and in particular, nuclear was a complete taboo, completely absent from anything environment or climate related, and threw me off entirely. I was pretty desperate. I think it's when I touched for myself what we now call the famous generation despair toward climate change. I went through that myself for a short period, but I guess that's a question of character. It didn't last very long, and I decided to take it upon myself to start an NGO, pro-nuclear NGO, bring back nuclear and the civil society into the conversation, and making sure, and that was my first mandate, that the contribution of nuclear was clearly and largely recognized as a key contributor to the energy transition worldwide. And I'm happy today because I think I'm at the end of a first season of that mandate, because it's achieved. And what we see today is, I think we can say it worked.
That's amazing. It's so interesting. And how did your background in, engineering, sales, and going through all of this translate finally into Voices of Nuclear?
In many ways, I think, because when you are trained in sales, you learn to understand what your counterpart needs. You try to put yourself in the shoes of the people you're talking to, and you actually develop communication skills. And a lot of engineers tend to think that communication is just a side or a secondary skill. I'm quite convinced now that it's not. That engineers, technicians, scientists need to stop despising too much this kind of communication skills, because it depends on how we communicate to people those technologies that they will choose to adopt them or not. So you can be an engineer and develop the greatest technology in the world, like nuclear, in my mind, is, and then it's being rejected, not used, and left aside. And what's the point? So technology, it's nothing else but science applied, made and put to work. But then we need all that effort of convincing and communicating for it to be put to use. So you want science to be put to use? Let's do those podcasts you do. Let's get that civil society working. Let's get that communication going. So I think that helped a lot. And that was a very important aspect of things. And the engineering part of your question, I think, translated into a very a thirst for rigor and a lot of expertise, even in something that was communication, NGO, and civil society. You can be happily dancing with a polar bear in the street while providing very sourced numbers, while being very thorough and rigorous in every claim you make. And I think the combination of the two is what made the successes of the Voices.
Right. So tell me a little bit more about the current work of Voices and, kind of what the mission and vision is there.
So the first objective we gave ourselves when we created the Voices back in 2018 was what I mentioned earlier, achieve the recognition of nuclear energy as a key contributor to the energy transition and the fight against climate change. To do that was a lot of changing the conversation, acting on the messenger in addition to the messaging next to populations, making sure the balance, risk, benefits was clear in the mind of people, so that citizens could take could make their own decisions while having the right facts in their hands. And that includes trusting the citizens with that choice. And what we realize is that people actually do take pretty rational decisions once they're being fed with whatever facts, and then they are able to balance out their own interest and to make the decision. But you have to have that trust into them. And so there's been a lot of pedagogy, there's been a lot of media, street action, influencing political decision makers and so on to reach the point where we are today. We are realizing now that I think with the industry and with the public opinion, we've managed that. We're pretty happy, and we consider it's a great success, and that the job has been done. And now we're embarking on a new journey, hopefully, what I call season 2 of the Voices of Nuclear, which is now to help the projects get off ground, because now nuclear is on paper, most of it. And it's time enough to make sure that those plants start producing that famous low carbon energy we've been talking about so much.
Right, absolutely. And I picked up a pamphlet from your area earlier today, and I was wondering what like an energy transition scenario is. I was kind of reading about those in it, and I'm wondering what is the Voices scenario and how is it different?
Oh, well, thank you very much for this question. We have indeed produced in-house, so I need to remind here that we're only volunteers. So that's quite a lot of huge effort coming from us. We produced an energy scenario for France 2050 based on the realization that all the scenarios that were up for debate prior to new decision making at the French and European level on energy mix, in our minds, were flawed. Were deeply flawed because they were relying on hypotheses that were way too risky and way too wishful thinking for us. And as citizens, what we wanted was to make sure that the energy transition would see the light. And we've seen a lot of relying on innovative technologies that were not very mature, not industrialized. There were no supply chain associated to it. Natural resources consumption that was off the charts, like as if everyone would have more than 100% granted of those resources for their own use, while there was a lot of competing uses actually in place. They were relying on levels of sobriety for the populations that are nowhere to be seen when we look around us. They were relying on potential relationships and collaborations between countries in a geopolitical future, close and far, that again, we were not so clear. And so we thought all those were a lot of uncertainties. And we thought that those scenarios would not reflect what would be a credible future. So we made a scenario where first we decided that it would not be a question of more renewables or more nuclear. It would be a question of taking all the low carbon energies and using them exactly to what they know how to do. You don't sleep on a stool and you don't sit on a bed. But those are different devices for you to rest. So same thing with the energies. They don't have the same impact on the grid. They don't provide the same services. So we need to put them exactly where they need to be. We need to have all low carbon sources. That means nuclear, but that also means hydroelectricity, pump and storage, solar, wind, geothermal. And we need to use them side by side to what they know how to do best. All those were hypotheses that we took, saying we want mature technologies, we want realistic hypotheses, and then we will see if it passes or not. Do we manage to succeed? And we do. We do. The very good news is that we made what we call the no bullshit scenario. Sorry for my French.
It's okay.
And we did the most pessimistic scenario we could imagine. And decided we would put progress before innovation. Innovation is great. Progress is better. And we would see if we would actually succeed in reaching net zero while providing energy to people. And we do. So it's a very optimistic result to a pessimistic scenario.
That's amazing. And let's talk a little bit more too about how Voices communicates with the public. Earlier you mentioned a polar bear dancing in the streets, and if people are familiar with you already, they might know what that means. But what's the symbolism there for people who don't?
Well, the polar bear first was an idea that did not come from the Voices originally. The pro-nuclear community is a small one, but very diverse and dispersed worldwide. It's someone that's called Eric Mayer, which is the head of Generation Atomic, that you may know, came up first with that idea, which we thought were brilliant. And we love good ideas, and we love to put our friends forward. So this is why we used it and reused it and again, because it's a great way to communicate to populations that did not associate nuclear with climate and with the environment, that we reclaim those symbols, that the youth can be pro an old, but it's imagined as to be an old technology, because it has very concrete and very clear benefits for its future. And we need to consider that whatever works and actually provided results that we can measure, that we can see, that we can enjoy, is something that we need to push forward and continue. Because nuclear energy is not a technology, it's physics. And you can do millions of stuffs with physics, and it can take you forward for forever. And it's a very enthusiastic way of seeing things. So using those symbols that mean already a lot to people, and explaining them why it makes sense, why those symbols are naturally also ours, is a great and actually an easy way to get the conversation started.
Right. No, that's a great point and a great way to describe it. And some other really interesting things that you all have here is a sticker for those that are watching on video. It says that nuclear is dangerous for fossil fuels. Can you explain that a little bit more as well?
So that's a very so that's how we try to do things at the Voices, which is to take very simple and straightforward formulations to explain some very rigorous concepts behind it. And the one behind this one is to say that today there is no other form of energy than nuclear that's capable of displacing fossil fuels anywhere at all times. If you take the set of criteria of having low carbon, small environmental footprint, always available anywhere geographically, energy on the planet, only nuclear answers that set of criteria. And the other energies that answer that set of criteria, but that are very high carbon content, are fossils. So you cannot degrade, or you will have the hardest time, degrade the level of service you provide humanity. I mean, humanity has enjoyed a certain level of service thanks to the energy the Industrial Revolution has been able to provide it. And we discovered living long lives, enjoyable lives with leisure, with cultural, intellectual pleasures, with time on our hands to enjoy our children and to raise them, and so on, etc., etc., etc. Not go hungry, not be sick. I mean, all of those are very important stuff, right? So we're not going to degrade the level of service. And if you don't replace the service that the fossil fuels were rendering humanity by something at least equivalent, and why not even better, you're just not going to do it. People are just going to not going to run with it. And considering we also like our democracies, and we also like what the kind of systems we've achieved, and it is always making the demonstration that you can take us even forward, we have to understand that, and I know it's a little blunt, and I know I've been called off a little bit before because of this, but I'm pretty convinced that the path forward is what I call the nucleocene, where fossil is essentially going to be replaced by nuclear, and the proportion of the world energy mix will remain, with the renewables maintaining 20% of the total. And in renewables, of course, I include hydro electricity, which is a very important renewable energy, and I exclude biomass, please, because I only want the low carbon ones. And all the fossils are going to be replaced by some generation, some technology of nuclear based.
Gotcha.
So I am a nucleocene advocate, because I think that's where the physics of it take us.
Yeah, I love that. And as we kind of begin to wrap up, I want to ask you what your vision personally, or maybe what Voices of Nuclear sees for the nuclear industry, 10, 20, 30 years down the line.
That's a good question. So I express myself for myself, but maybe also a little bit for the Voices of Nuclear, because it draws on the principles we've liked to put forward up to now, and hopefully in the future. The nuclear industry will have a bright future. There's almost no way around it. It's needed, it's required. There's actually little alternatives. And the fact that there's little alternatives is not a bad news, it's a good one, because it's a good technology. It's a good technology with lots of benefits and manageable risks. Now, what I would be more worried about is maybe the next 5-10 years. Why? Because the situation towards the world, public opinion, the decision makers, the level of understanding and familiarity of the populations with nuclear is still very fresh, is still very unstable and fragile. We need to consolidate that a lot, and it is going to take time. And I wouldn't want the nuclear industry to become too confident too quick, and to start making the mistakes that some other technologies have made, to just ride the surfing the waves. That's an expression we have in French. I don't know if you have it in English as well.
Yeah, no, it translated.
You ride the waves. Okay. And you enjoy the hype, right?
Uh-huh.
And then you maybe start making claims that are a little bit too forward, and then take the risk of losing the hard-won credibility that nuclear enjoys today. So coming from people like I, who've been as a volunteer full-time, which is a very, very important effort, been working for nuclear to regain that credibility, for the industry to regain that credibility, and not to be discarded as a no good player. I am asking the nuclear industry to take its responsibility now, and to just not forget too quick and run too fast. And it is a bright future out there, so no need to be over optimistic in what we're saying. I think we can just tell the truth. We can be reasonable and cautious, because that's already very positive, much better than what anyone else can propose, and it's already a very, very good value proposition. So no need to overdo it. Just be who you are, do what you know how to do it well, and it can only go very well.
Yeah, that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Myrto, for your time and coming on Titans of Nuclear today.
And thank you so much, Sarah, for having me. It was a great time, and it's a great setting and situation to have that conversation, because I think we actually did it. Mm-hmm. So well done, all of us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
and initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.